In your research, you really spoke about how loyalty is actually quite fragile and that trust is the new battleground.
If you take a look at the whole equation, it's based on trust. So we also find that there are about 25% of consumer continue to buy the brand that they trust, even if it costs more.
And the interesting thing about that is I'm sure based on different customer demographics, what you're describing is very different. It's by brand, by price, by product, all of it. There's a lot of complexity in that.
The challenge is that you need a lot of history and you need a lot of data outside of your purchasing information. So,
welcome back to Retail in America, Season 2, and a limited series sponsored by IBM. Today, we're diving into one of the most important findings from IBM's Global Consumer Research study that loyalty just isn't enough anymore. As AI begins to evaluate brands on our behalf, trust becomes the currency, and advocacy becomes the real differentiator. I'm joined again by Cheung from the IBM Institute for Business Value to explore how data, trust, and transparency are reshaping modern retail. So Jane, welcome back to Retail in America.
thank you. Glad to be back. It's always fun.
Always fun. And this is a very fun topic because I wanted to share a couple of statistics here because in your research, you really spoke about how loyalty is actually quite fragile and that trust is the new battleground. I love that term. So you've reported that nearly half of consumers would drop a brand that raises prices without adding any value, and that 24% trust AI recommendations outright without question, and 39% will trade down if the value doesn't hold. So can you walk us through that? Because those are pretty alarming numbers.
Yes. So when I conduct the study, we look at the loyalty program in the age of AI, and what we find is the existing loyalty program is changing. It's going to have to change to accommodate AI. In our study, we find that on a global average, about people have 7 different loyalty programs, but use less than half. And it is alarming that people will switch brand without adding value. So that's tied to the economic condition, maybe, because if you just increase the price and without adding any value, people don't see the need to stay with you. There are many, many options and many alternatives. So that get us start thinking about this year's study to think about what matters. What does loyalty really matter? So you need to give a definition of that, right? So is it just repeat purchase? What does loyalty mean? And in the world of AI, how do you go about it? Because, what does it mean when an AI agent is loyal to you, right? So therefore, we introduce the idea of advocacy. So if you take a look at the whole equation, it's based on trust. So we also find that there are about 25% of consumer continue to buy the brand that they trust, even if it costs more. So that's the brand value right there. And then we also find out, yes, people will leave your brand, but their advocacy is pretty high. About half of the consumer, when they use something that they like, they amplify your brand. They introduce a new brand to friends and family. So it's kind of like, it has two edges with this sword, right? So then when you look at, then we go on the direction to say, okay, if people will continue to buy your brand, even if it costs more, because quality is important for them and you deliver the quality, what does that do in the world of AI? What do you eventually want to happen? And we find that there are a group of people in the world of AI that are more social. They will introduce your brand to friends and family in person or via social media, which is a growing channel for people to learn about new brands. And then what we need to do is capture that and amplify it and build the efficacy on it And so that's how we talk about the trust, loyalty, and advocacy. It works in the loop.
Wow. And the interesting thing about that is I'm sure based on different customer demographics, what you're describing is very different. It's by brand, by price, by customer demographic, by product, all of it. There's a lot of complexity in that.
Yes, yes. And in the study, we looked at consumer. We look at the group of consumer. We look at their preference of engagement and their degree of what drive them. Is it price? Is it brand connection? Is it habit? So in the study, we actually examined the different consumer segment in a way of how much do they use AI and what's their engagement preference and what attract them to a brand and also stay with the brand. So it's not linear. So I always tell our clients, just because you mark it down doesn't mean it's going to move from your floor.
Right. Right. Well, and I love your point around you as a brand have to determine what loyalty is for you. And you're right. I think that it has been quite simple in the past of like spend this and earn points, spend this and get discounts. Uh, They the loyalty seemed very spend related, and things airline industries seem to run that way still. Hotels industry seem to run that way, and I just wonder how all of this will continue to change because there's no shortage of social media content about the airlines. What are you seeing and how does that evolve?
Right. So in our study, we also asked people about what's important for you from a brand standpoint. So traditional discounts, reward program that works. However, me personally, being in the consulting world, I found that points are getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's requiring me more and more points to do that. We also find that experience is important. So, the opportunity to co-create, the opportunity to have early access. Actually, the opportunity, if you think about reward, even the opportunity to use your reward points to pay bills. That's also important. So the value of your reward are different for different group of consumers. So it's not one size fit all. And here's where I think AI can help, because if your assistant graduate now to become your agent and is making decision for you, is reasoning for you, then all these criteria needs to be captured, right? So there are the product data that is important because you need to make the short list. You need to appear in the short list. Then there's the customer data, which should include multiple dimension of this information. The challenge is that you need a lot of history and you need a lot of data outside of your purchasing information. So
Wow. And which really takes me to my next question, and we spoke this about this in our first conversation, is around concerns about data privacy. And so you're saying like that's the driver of loyalty, which it has always been, but this is taking it to a whole other level. And I wanted to quote this from your report that 83% of consumers express multiple concerns about how their data will be used. So what you're saying is it's very
yes.
difficult to create loyalty without data, yet customers are very concerned about where their data is being used.
Yeah, so I don't think this is new news, Ron, but transparency is the key to earn trust, right? So transparency is important, and I also want to say that consumer are getting smarter and smarter. They are becoming more digital themselves, so they are more aware. And so for brands and retailer, you need to make sure that your data is correct, your data is accurate, and that you have the right governance. Who can access what data? I think that's important. One of the IBM executive explained to me, it's like, Jane, you need to have a data bouncer that actually
That's funny.
Yeah, you need to make sure that the right role have the right level of data. So it's kind of like having a bouncer at the door saying, like, do you have data to access this kind of information, and how do you use this information? Is the exchange of information.
Well, and also the bouncer to keep you out, keep the bad information out, of the clean.
Exactly, and keep the bad people out the door. You have no business
Right,
here.
you can't come in. Well, I've heard that from brands that I've spoken to, is in some cases they've completely started an entirely new data system. They didn't try to clean what they owned. They started over and said and kept it exclusive, kind of locked. I'm not sure what the terminology is, but kind of kept it, that particular data source, locked from any other changes so that they could really test and learn about AI and how that kind of program clean data conversation really changes. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, because you're dealing with oftentimes different types of data. So, being in retail for many years, we all know that we have a lot of data. We used to say there's never a lack of data, but it's the usability of data, right? It's the form of data. And most of the company, I think they are very good with the structured data that they've been dealing with for years. But now you are looking at unstructured data, and it's a totally different, in many cases, the structure of the data, the governance of the data, and the interaction between the different types of data, I think is what people are trying to figure out.
So interesting. And I want to move into, you spoke about like advocacy and preparing for agents. So I wanted to quote this number, which you had mentioned: 47% of consumers recommended a brand in the last 6 months. So you had started this by saying it's a really important advocacy is how the consumers are sharing what they think. And how do brands prepare for that next era of brand advocacy networks?
The good news is, Ron, if you are working with assistant and agent, not only is the word of mouth, but imagine you can go viral, if you have a positive experience. So it's back to, what we talk about all the time here is really being transparent with the data, being accurate, and make sure that you have your value proposition correct in your offering so that there's no inconsistency. And also to use AI not just to help people for shopping, but have a brand advocacy, have your customer service. Many companies already have customer service assistant, and they can collect the feedback for you, and you can leverage that information to improve and communicate, right? So now that we know across all ages, people are used to conversational commerce, it can be a big brand building opportunity for you, because you can just talk about it. You can talk about your experience, and then that can be shared once you have your integration and your data ready. So the whole brand advocacy, sort of like the wheel will go, and then you actually have an engine working for you. The important thing is you need to make sure that you are synchronizing the feedback in real time so that it's not dated, right? Because like you said, information travel very fast these days. And then you can provide value. It's not just reward and point. So have understand what is valuable to your strongest advocate, and then you have a value exchange with them, right? So it's a reinforcing system, sort of.
Huh. And I guess as I think about this, what you're describing, because it's also your experience and your loyalty could be very different by channel. So you could have one extraordinary experience in a store and then a very poor experience on e-commerce, or it's a delivery experience, or it's some other kind of repair, replace. There are many areas for failure, points of failure when it comes to creating experiences. So it's really brands being aware of what all the touch points are, and that every time you're engaging, you're building or not loyalty, because they all could become part of this advocacy network.
Yeah, so that's why I think transparency is really important. And even if you make a mistake, admit it and make sure that you communicate how do you make it better because people are used to it these days, right? So you gotta make sure that you are transparent and you communicate and then you provide transparency and make an improvement of it.
Right. And Jane, as we wrap up here, is there one single action that retailers should take to ensure their brand gets first in this very critical decision tree that's happening now around loyalty and search and customer retention? What's one thing they could do today?
I think is similar to what we talked about, Ron, is to make sure that your piping, your plumbing works, that you can integrate easily. You know, we talked about converged commerce earlier in the session, which is you got to make sure your information can flow and that the data is available. Because if you know, how do you make sure that your brand will show up? You can't make the short list if you're not even on the radar, right?
Right. That's really, and the speed at which then you get on the radar becomes critical to your point of like the plumbing has to work for the accuracy and the speed of that data to come through.
Right. And you got to make sure you got the right bouncer there to keep the bad actor out and to make sure
Love
the
this.
right access and the right information is being exchanged and be transparent about it, you know, so that consumer understand that their information is being protected so that they will continue to chat with you via, you know, commerce, you know, conversational commerce, continue to have this exchange. One of the quotes I got from the study, which is very interesting, is, you know, it was a CIO talking about, you know, the whole agentic experience. He said, you know, it's difficult for him to actually make any big purchases without consulting his AI assistant
Uh-huh.
because you know he has so much faith in it, and he believed that AI is a way of providing neutral, is a neutral advisor, is easy to use, while it's giving you information, it's also learning more about you. So it's a very natural way to engage with shoppers and consumers.
Fascinating. And where can people learn more about this and the study, Jane?
The study is targeted to launch on January 7th. It will be available via the IBM IBV website, so people can go and download the study.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane. So this is a really fascinating topic that I think we have a lot to unpack and understand here. It's really, really fascinating. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. My pleasure. And so, as Jane said, loyalty may be fragile, but advocacy is powerful, especially in a world where AI is helping make the decisions. So, to explore the full research and future predictions, check out the IBM IBV study, as Jane mentioned, and I'll put it in the show notes. This is Retail in America and Ron Thurston, and this episode is sponsored by IBM. We'll see you on the next show.